A few weeks ago, I did a couple podcast interviews because I've worked in and around college admissions for the last decade, and I have a lot of opinions about it. And both of the interviewers asked me, well, like Kevin, you make all these criticisms in your new book, Surviving the College Admissions Madness, but what can we do to stop the madness or have some type of admissions reforms? And I do propose many reforms. I dedicate a video to it briefly, but the fundamental issue is that elite universities are unlikely to change their ways. Some things never change, and elite universities are no different. College admissions is rife with a bias for the status quo, where we exhibit an implicit preference for a system whose alternatives are impossible to imagine, which is also a kind of system justification. Universities, if anything, are very much lacking in imagination or considering alternative ways to conduct their operations. Politicians are also not going to reform a system that benefits their offspring and helps fill their staff. Parents with multiple children start to suspect something's off once their youngest child finishes applying or graduating from college. But by then, they've moved on to other concerns. Politicians and society's elite are not incentivized to reform a system where the rules are stacked in favor of their offspring and family friends. If anything, elites push back against efforts to enroll more diverse classes, and they lobby to maintain practices like legacy admissions, large donations, and spaces for recruited athletes playing obscure sports, which is something I highlight in other content. Universities themselves are unlikely to implement changes, and even when they do, it occurs at a glacial pace, not only because they fail to coordinate among all of their university campuses, but also, as anyone that's ever worked in a large bureaucracy knows, things are just highly inefficient and proceed very slowly. There was one positive step, for example, in discontinuing the deeply flawed SAT and ACT writing section, which was an experiment that was introduced in the mid-2000s, but it took over a decade to terminate that requirement. And there was also this weird interim period in the early 2010s where some universities phased out the writing section, whereas others declared that ballot exams must have the writing. And this inconsistent messaging and lack of coordination produced untold confusion and unnecessary exam settings for unaware students. And that necessarily increased the bottom line for the College Board and the ACT. Applicants today still wonder whether they need the additional and more expensive writing section alongside juggling which universities do or don't superscore. And this is also a practice that incentivizes sitting for many exams. And so for a lot of students, if universities simply coordinated their testing requirements, that would decrease a lot of the stress that's associated with applying, preparing for, and taking your exams. And test optional hasn't really abated the test-obsessed mania of many students and families and communities, because universities still want to see high test scores. Administrators understand students will apply in record numbers, regardless of how arduous or inconsistent the requirements. Why bother with transparency when public relations consultants suggest that they can simply make a button on their website, like the University of Kentucky does, that assures you applying is easy? Unless there's a substantial decrease in demand for elite university degrees, which I don't forecast happening, then the runaway admissions train will continue barreling along its tracks. Reforms arise only after widespread public outcry, as in the Varsity Blues admissions scandal, or when a critical mass of their peer institutions moves first. But universities are unlikely to move first, like for example discontinuing early decision practices that overwhelmingly favor elite, affluent families in America's top high schools, because they fear that if they go first, they might be left behind in the student recruitment arms race. And so for these reasons briefly, I'm not optimistic that the college admissions madness is going to change anytime soon, either from pressure outside of the system or from elite universities themselves, who are very resistant to change. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find my email in the information section of this video, so feel free to reach out if you're interested in working together.